You're listening to the This Is Horror Podcast, episode number 2.
Welcome to the second This Is Horror Podcast. I'm joined with my co-host John Costello.
Hello there.
And Dan Howarth.
Evening.
And I'm Michael Wilson. Now today we're going to be discussing Before Dawn. We'll be giving it a review, giving our thoughts on it, and then following on from that there will be an interview with David Moody. I'll be talking to him about Before Dawn, and I'll also be talking to him about zombies in general. So let's kick off then with a synopsis of Before Dawn. So, zombie enthusiast and Emmerdale actor, yes, they go together sometimes, Dominic Brunt. Well, we'll get to that in a minute, John. Eager. Zombies and Emmerdale. Two things that Dominic Brunt, the filmmaker, actor and director of Before Dawn, loves. And Before Dawn is about an estranged couple that go on a vacation to try and patch up their troubled relationship to a isolated cottage in the countryside. And whilst they're there, about 45 minutes later, there's a zombie attack. That pretty much is that's kind of the spoiler-free synopsis, I'd say. I mean, that's the setup.
Yeah.
You think I need to give more detail?
I'm not really sure how much extra there is to give, to be fair, mate. I think that's the film in a nutshell, isn't it, really?
It's fairly minimalist, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, the first 30 minutes is spent setting up from them going from their house to the countryside on a drive. A long drive. You can see the review in the show notes to get a flavour of what I thought in particular. Dan hasn't been treated to that review yet, but he'll get to see it after the show. I didn't want to influence the guy.
After about 50 minutes, I was thinking about how much I hated you for making me watch it. It was just completely generic, and well, the first hour is completely tedious. The scene where they're driving down the motorway was something you'd expect to see on a video that they'd show you before you start taking driving lessons. It was just... it just didn't do anything. The car was moving forward, but the plot was fucking stalled. It was absolutely ridiculous. And from that point on, I mean, by the time things do start happening at the home, but the country house where they end up, I mean, I was bored. I was genuinely bored. And that is pretty much unforgivable in a film.
It's fantastic that you mentioned the 50 minutes level, Dan, because we kind of looked at each other and paused it after 50 minutes and said it had another 3 minutes to actually make our decision as to whether we just didn't watch any more of it or whether we watched it through till the end.
Well, I mean, I knew we were watching it for this podcast.
So did we, but it was so painful.
Yeah, but I stuck with it for that reason. But I mean, if I'd have got this, if I'd have rented it or something, and I'd been watching it, I would have switched it off long before the end, because it was just far too slow in anything happening. There's not, you can deal with kind of a slow build-up or a slow burn when there's tension behind it, but there was just nothing that was driving the narrative forward at all. It was just totally empty, and it just... Like you say, it was tedious. I mean, there were some nice shots of the rolling hills in the Yorkshire Dales or the Lake District or wherever they were supposed to be, but those were the only highlights of the first 50 minutes. It was pretty tedious stuff, I've got to be honest.
They drew out everything. I mean, the drive itself was ridiculously long, particularly the motorway section. I mean, they had about 20 seconds on, and John and I are like, okay, cut away. No, you're not. Okay, the motorway. Well, what do you know? I said to John, in fact, they're not even driving a nice car. I think it was a Vauxhall Astra, and no offence to anyone who has a Vauxhall Astra.
It was a maroon K-Reg Vauxhall Astra.
Yeah.
And because this was one of the inconsistencies that I noticed.
Oh, God.
If his wife is such a high flyer, why are they driving such a shit heap of a car?
But
it just made no sense to me.
I think I can help you out on that one, Dan. I think they're not living together.
Yeah, I know, but you wouldn't have thought, if she's used to driving around in a BMW 5 Series or something and they go away for the weekend, you wouldn't have thought she'd quite happily jump in, this absolute wreck of a car when she could have driven him up there in something a bit swankier. I just thought that was a bit... I don't know. That was just one of the many, many problems that I had with this film.
Okay, well, I think my basic problem started with the title. It's called what? Before Dawn, right? So how long does the action take place over? You would expect that would be a night. To be logical.
Yeah.
How long does it actually take place over? A weekend, right?
Yep.
Or at least a day and a half, most of which is in the daytime. So where Before Dawn comes from, I'm not exactly sure, but it certainly doesn't have much to do with the unfolding plot. So that was a problem. The opening scene, we were kind of looking at each other, we were thinking framing, camera work, sound, film grading. Grading would be nice. And then any kind of semblance of ongoing plot. We get the woman, the mother-in-law, talking to him as if he's adult and saying Alex, which is explained in the plot, isn't it? But we looked at each other when this happened and went, what the hell was all that about?
Yeah.
Fortunately, a couple of minutes later, that's explained. Unlike the kid's picture.
Yes.
There's this big thing made about the kid's picture, where the kid's drawn a picture and he's kind of looking at it and it's all great and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, A, show us the picture, and B, this must have something to do with the plot because they're making such a song and dance about it. So not only do we not get to see the picture, but the picture is absolutely irrelevant to anything that happens thereafter.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And then we get a shot of him when he's giving some dialogue, and it's just wobbly cam for its own sake. I mean, I love handheld camera work when it's done well. What I don't like is when you've got a line of dialogue that the guys... you have to rewind it and hear it 3 more times because you can't get the fact that the guy's head is mostly out of shot, out of your head. So it's like, why did you actually not think... It's like, that Ed Wood thing where he goes past the gravestone and knocks the gravestone and the gravestone wobbles and he says, cut, great, next shot. And somebody says, hang on a minute, the gravestone moved. Shouldn't we reshoot that? No, only minor detail, carry on. I kind of got that flavour about this somehow. I don't know what you think, Michael, because you were there in the room.
I don't even know where to start. There's so many points to make. And in fact, which I have mentioned a lot of these things in the review. So one of the things that you just mentioned was the shaky camera work, and I said at times it seemed like it was almost a found footage film, the way that they were shaking all over the place, but you knew that wasn't intentional.
Yeah, in particular in the garage, I thought.
Oh, God.
Oh, I've mentioned the garage scene, and I mean, the garage scene...
Well, something happens in the garage scene, to be fair, which is the first time in the film something really does happen.
Yeah.
That was a plus, but it was so drawn out. It went on for 5 minutes. And really, they could have done that in 1 or 2 minutes. But also, the zombies seemed more kind of cabaret than scary. It just didn't in any way fill me with fear. To be honest, at that point, I was rooting for the zombie. I was like, can we just take out these characters and be done with it? Because I've had enough.
Yeah, it's a shame because, I mean, you could see that they were trying to do something with the characters. You could see that they were trying to put some kind of development with the relationship, with her finding out about stuff that he's done, I quite liked, in fact, the revelation that he knows about the layout of the place because he's actually been there before with someone else, which is quite nice. But all logic flies out the window so many times, not least when she's been bitten by this guy that she's met while out jogging. She comes back with this really nasty wound on her leg, and he's saying, no, I've got to take you to A&E. No, I've got to take you to A&E. No, I've got to take you to A&E. Oh, fuck it, I'll put you to bed then.
Yeah.
And despite the fact that they've got a fully functioning, working car outside the door, it's not used at any point after they get to the cottage, which is just beyond bizarre.
Yeah, I agree. I wrote down, I made a few notes this time when I was watching it, rather than flying by the seat of my pants like I did when we reviewed Chain. But I put that it had all kind of the boring zombie cliches, didn't it, really? Oh, I've got no signal on my phone, we should call somebody else and get them involved. Oh no, I'll just put you to bed, you'll be fine. It's just so many tired kind of staples of bad zombie films that you'd seen before, and I don't know, it really cheapened anything that, the positives of the film were cheapened by those kind of, it would be unfair to call it lazy, because I'm sure it's not, but there's just no originality in 99% of what was done here, and I think that really cheapened the things that actually did work about it. Like you say, the revelation about his affair, I think that was probably a highlight. If there had been more moments like that in the relationship between the two characters, maybe wouldn't have minded some of the the other shoddier elements of the film, but it was devoid of any originality for the most part, I would have thought, really.
Well, I want to do as much positivity as I can in any review of any film, particularly because more than literature, film is my bag. But to be brutally honest with you, when I have to sit through a film like this, I just kind of begrudge every minute that I'm sitting with it, because it's just I'm dying inside a little bit every time I watch something like this. As an A-level film studies lecturer, one of the things that I do every year is I film projects, and one of the first things that I teach my students is, don't make individual shots too long, and don't make individual scenes too long. That's kind of rule number one. And this film broke both of those rules with abandon for pretty much every shot and every scene, which was unforgivable.
But reading up on Dominic Brunt, it's quite clear that this guy is genuinely passionate about horror and about zombies. So it's not like some soap opera actor that thought, oh, I'll have a punt at making a horror film. He has a genuine passion, as can be illustrated through him heading up the Leeds Zombie Film Festival, for one. Yeah, I mean, okay, you're looking a bit... You're not convinced by that, but he is doing other things within the genre, even if his passion just lies with zombies, let's say. I mean, it feels quite harsh to sit here and slag off the film, but unfortunately, when we've been presented with this, we don't have...
You have to call it as you see it, don't you?
Yeah, and I just wonder, and perhaps I am making excuses for him, but did he take on too much when he decided he was going to be the filmmaker, the director, to star in it, to edit it? I just think it...
No, I don't think he did. I think what he did was he thought that amateur enthusiasm, if I can be as bold as to put it like that, would see them through in the face of a poor script, poor technical skills on display at any rate, and the way in which the thing all feels a little bit half-baked and predictable, and as Dan says, zombie films are 10 a penny these days. We're so used to seeing stuff like this, so to make an impression on us, a zombie film has to be doing things new. It has to be doing things that we haven't seen before. It has to be fresh and innovative, and this film was none of those things, and I think that was where it really kind of started to stick in my craw, the fact that I was watching a film that has limited technical merit, limited narrative merit, and I'd seen variations on it God knows how many times in my life, and I think that is ultimately a problem with zombie films as much as it is with this film.
I mean, I just want to say how I first came to know about Before Dawn, and that was through FrightFest this year. It was on in the Discovery screen, and I knew at that point that it had this Dom Brunt, who's a soap opera actor, directing and making it. So when I heard that, sorry Emmerdale fans, the one of you that is out there listening to this, but to me that didn't seem to be the mark of a high quality horror film. But there are a few films in the Discovery screen where there's a bit of a vibe and a buzz after, and people are talking about them. And actually, Before Dawn, I'm serious, people were praising it. People liked this film. And if you go online, I think this is something that really needs to be addressed. There are a lot more positive reviews of Before Dawn than there are negative ones. And, I mean, there's do I name websites? Or?
Why not?
I mean, there's Starburst magazine, their website. Now, I love Starburst. They're a respected website, a respected magazine. So much so that they are in fact shortlisted for the Magazine of the Year in our own awards. But they've given this a glowing review and 9 out of 10 stars, and I don't understand what film they've seen. I don't see how you could arrive at that conclusion. And so either people are seeing something that all three of us haven't seen and we've independently came to the same conclusion, or is there a wider issue? And that issue is that as horror fans, people almost expect less from the horror genre than they do from other genres. And I think another case in point for that would be at FrightFest. Reactions to Sinister was as if it was one of the best films in the world. Now, I'll grant that it was a reasonable film, but it wasn't actually doing anything that original. The best point for me was actually the soundtrack, which I did think was very, very good. But, it was a troubled writer. We've seen that in a lot of Stephen King books. We've seen similar things in the Amityville Horror.
Well, horror genre is one of the genres that exists most through familiarity and repetition of things that people have seen before. So there's a sort of fan expectation that it will be somewhat similar to what's gone before, with doing some things differently, some things with a new twist or whatever. And it's, I take no pleasure at all in trashing a film. A lot of people have gone to a lot of trouble to make this film. I take absolutely no pleasure in trashing it, but on the other hand, I have to call as I see, and I can only take what was presented in front of me and what we sat through last weekend. And unfortunately, the amount of positivity that I got out of that film, as far as a positive experience is concerned, negligible. What about you, Dan?
I agree. I mean, is this guy's first film as a director?
Yeah.
Do we know that it's the first one he's put out? I mean, fair play to him, because what he's done in terms of making the effort to actually put something together, I don't think you can ever trash anybody who gets off their arse and actually, produces something of any artistic merit. I mean, I'm not saying that there is, a huge amount in this film, but he's taken the time to sit down and, plan this film out and, get people together and actually film it. And, I'm not going to criticise somebody who steps outside of their box as a soap actor to, step into doing something that they actually love. It's a fair play to him for that. But I think just in terms of, the actual zombie genre, I mean, I think this adds very little to what is already a genre or subgenre that is crowded with an awful lot of absolute dross, to be honest. And, it's a shame, but that said, I'd probably, if he turned out another film and there was something, you heard a bit of buzz about it, I'd probably go back and watch another one just to see if he can actually progress and see if he can, get away from what has been, a very bog average, standard zombie directorial debut from him, really. I think I've lost point of what you actually asked me there, but I was just rambling on a bit. I meant to jump in a bit earlier on. But
no, that's cool. I mean, I think it's, it's all relevant, and as I say, I don't like to take anything down just for its own sake.
Oh, of course.
There's so many things wrong with this that you have to, as Michael pointed out earlier, you have to wonder what the reviews, where they were coming from. And begs the question, as Michael so eloquently put it, is there a problem in the wider horror genre, more than most other genres, about being too easily satisfied and being not critical enough or not objective enough or not able enough to appreciate or fail to appreciate something that is not worthy of being appreciated in that sense?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there has to be a hook, doesn't there, behind every film, be it, high quality production or an original story idea, somebody trying to do something a bit different, even if it is a low budget film and it fails in what it's trying to do. If there's some ambition there or some sort of creativity behind it, you can appreciate that. But I do believe that, the zombie subgenre has hit the wall. I mean, I can't think of any kind of trope, particularly with zombies, that hasn't been touched upon in literature or film. I mean, surely they've done absolutely fucking everything they possibly can with zombies. And there was nothing here that I think people could get particularly enthused about. I mean, I'm not honestly sure where the positive reviews have come from. I mean, it's, if somebody else enjoys it, then maybe they just have lower standards than I do. I mean, but I've seen fair few zombie films, and this will just be lost into what is, a congealed mush of 20 other zombie films that have had no real, moments of particular note. I mean, you have your standouts in the genre. I mean, there's Romero's films, and 28 Days Later was, an absolutely brilliant film. But where does this fall? I mean, give it a couple of months or so, and I could probably barely tell you one scene. Nothing really kind of stood out, and maybe that, if there is such a buzz around this film, maybe it speaks about the declining quality of zombie films rather than, the tastes of the individual. I mean, maybe this is just one of the better ones in what's a bit of a bad bunch, really.
I think what Michael was alluding to more than that, even more than zombie films, is does horror as a genre suffer from a lack of objective critical response amongst its fans and adherents?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think people go into horror films with lower expectations than they do of any other genre, to be honest. I mean, I think that in particular, I can kind of remember this at college, like when we'd all get together on weekends and you stick a few films on and you think, all I want to see is something kind of shitty and gory, or your expectations are immediately lowered. But if you're watching a thriller or a science fiction film in particular, I think you are, or people in general are expecting something with a bit more artistic merit. Maybe when they stick a horror film in the DVD player or watch one online, they're expecting the bare minimum, and if they get that, then they're satisfied. Maybe it is just declining audience standards towards horror films.
Well, I think the last time that I could genuinely say that I sat down in front of a DVD that I didn't really have too much expectations of, and that genuinely surprised me, and that I found it a genuinely excellent experience, would probably be, you could count them on the fingers of one hand in the last few years. The Kill List comes to mind.
Oh, yeah.
But, when was the last time that you got an experience like the first time that you ever sat down to watch the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, or Dawn of the Dead, or Night of the Living Dead, or Suspiria, or something along those lines? Just that level of excellence is very, very hard to find these days. So if the average has sunk below a particular level, then, how are people have to get their kicks from somewhere. So I guess that the horror film declining standards, dumbing down, discuss.
I think whilst there are a lot of bad horror films out there, there are still a lot of very good horror films that are being made. In the 3 standout films that I had, again, at FrightFest, which I'm probably going to go back to a lot, but that was a weekend. 5 days of horror films, so there was a lot covered at that point. But the ones that stood out for me were The Seasoning House, which you could argue is cross-genre. In fact, just thinking about what all of the ones that stand out are, they are all pretty cross-genre.
Which is good.
Which I think could potentially be saying that people need to mix it up a little bit with horror. The other two that would have been in my top 3 were Remnants, which was an apocalyptic horror, and I always get 2 films muddled up. One of them is called Sleep Tight, and one of them is called Under the Bed. Now, the one that I liked was directed by the director of the original Wreck.
Okay.
And was a Polanski-esque noir horror. The other one, which I get it muddled up with, was kind of a Disney film masquerading as horror, with some annoying children, but they just said fuck or had blood in it a few too many times, and
okay,
I think we're going to lose our clean rating on iTunes for the language. I think I've thrown it right out the window.
Yeah, I think we're going for the NC-17 here.
Jennifer Lynch would approve.
Yeah, I think she would. And, you know, Chained was a lot better than this, and it was a low-budget horror thriller that had some kind of decent intentions and some clever parts to it. It wasn't by any means the full deal, but it was, you know, having watched Chained not long before we watched Before Dawn, I think it would probably be safe to say that, you know, Before Dawn is a perfect example of a kind of what I know is a horribly pejorative way of saying it, but is a kind of an amateur horror film with people who've just set out to do this in the best intentions, but kind of haven't really delivered. But then you look at someone like Romero and Night of the Living Dead back in 1968, which I'm sure that this film pays a few little homages to in it, not least when the woman is attacked when she's out jogging with the guy kind of coming towards her at, you know, top speed, not just shuffling like the guy in Romero's Graveyard.
In a suit,
yeah, absolutely. But you've got the all of the love for horror films kind of comes through, but that isn't enough to sustain it. It has to have something else, and I just don't think this film brings anything else to the table.
Well, you just end up with a, you know, pastiche or homage, don't you, really? Otherwise, if there's no, you know, if you're just nodding along to your favourite films, you know, it's almost the same, you know, cinematic karaoke. Yeah. Almost, you know, just rehashing all your favourite things from...
But to be true, I think that, you know, the whole zombie genre in literature has kind of bottomed out, and in film also. I just wish that they'd actually stop for a while now. Let's have a moratorium on zombies, and let's do and twinkly fucking vampires, and let's do something interesting with the genre. As Michael says, let's mix genres, let's have some hybrids going, let's have some noir, horror, thriller, weird stuff that kind of works and has some originality about it, rather than just keeping on recycling this kind of selection of tried and tested but very bland tropes.
Okay, so if we now move on to the second half of the film, so we're going to go into a bit of spoiler territory now, John.
So the second half is a little better than the first half, particularly after, even though the guy's not taken the opportunity to take his wife to hospital like he said he was going to, and even though she's upstairs in the bed panting and slavering and turning into a zombie, another character arrives, and it's a guy, I can't remember his name.
I think is it Nicky Evans from Shameless?
That's right. And so he turns up and kind of produces a manic stoner turn, which is mildly interesting, and there's a reasonable plot reason for him turning up, because the one idea that the film has got is that what if once a zombie has fed, that slakes its zombiedom thirst and the person reverts back to human again, which when you actually elucidate it and you talk about it out loud is kind of bollocks.
True, but it would have been quite an interesting theme if they'd have had kind of the stones to run with it. I mean, there's a whole avenue of, you know, if she had have come back after having fed, you know, the kind of guilt and, you know, the dirt on her conscience really would have been something quite interesting to examine, having known that, you know, she's recently partaken in a bout of cannibalism. I think that would have been something interesting to examine in terms of her character. But you're right, as an idea, it was it was a bit half-baked, really. I don't think it was kind of, oh, what if we do this? Oh, but then we'll just carry on and ignore it again. It was kind of half an idea that wasn't really developed or particularly thought through, and then they just thought, well, at the end of the day, we can just finish it off like every other kind of zombie film that you've ever seen, really. Well, I think maybe they bottled a little bit of they missed a bit of an opportunity there to maybe do something slightly different, even if it wasn't going to be great. It would have been something a bit more original than, what we actually saw.
Yeah, because the plot reason that it's being done is simply that he's wrong. And so it's the twist, like, the end of Night of the Living Dead, we have the twist. The end of quite a few of the zombie movies, we've got something that we weren't expecting. But this one, I think, to be honest, we were all expecting it wasn't going to work out that way. And, if you haven't driven away long before when you've had your chance, then... and you've kept it in this one location for, plot and budget reasons, then, again, like Chained, there could only be one ending, really, couldn't there?
Yeah, you're right. I think it's interesting to see the kind of chasm of difference between those two films. I mean, obviously Chained had a higher budget than Before Dawn, but in terms of the setting of it, they're both very similar kind of setups, and to watch, the emotional connection between the two characters in Chained, and then the relative lack thereof between the two characters in Before Dawn, I think that, it showed that there was more that could be done with this film. Again, the not really kind of developed that relationship as far as they could have. I didn't think there was maybe more that could have been done with the setup. The isolated house, it's a zombie trope anyway, but, we have seen in other films that there's more that can be done with a limited location.
I think there are quite a few parallels between Before Dawn and Chained, and unfortunately it does not reflect well on
really
Before Dawn. Both of them were shot around 14 days. Both of them were on a relatively low budget, and both of them had minimal location and minimal actors.
14 days? That's astounding. That's so much longer than I would have thought.
Yeah, I mean, I got the impression that it was made in the time scale that it was set over. I mean, maybe this guy's got a few days off making Emmerdale and earning his crust, and he's, grabbed a couple of actor friends and just put a movie together in, over a long weekend or something. But, I mean, to 2 weeks, you would maybe expect something a little bit more if they had that time.
Because when the thing ramps up and you get the scene in the garage, you kind of think that that's going to kick the film into a higher gear. And the garage scene is far too long, and the zombie actually becomes kind of a bit comical. And then once he stove the zombie's head in, it just goes back to being what it was before again, and it doesn't ramp it up really. It doesn't kick it into a higher gear. It's a real disappointment.
No, well, I mean, the parallel that you can draw here, and I don't want to get into the slow zombie versus fast zombie argument, because that's one that people, battle about within the horror genre, and probably will do until we actually suffer through a fucking zombie apocalypse ourselves. But you look at a film like 28 Days Later, where the zombies, or the infected as they are in that, can run, and they're physically strong and powerful. That's the kind of vibe that they were going for here.
Yeah.
Yet when this guy who is a bit dumpy, he's a little bit overweight, he doesn't look like he does a lot of exercise, and he's had an absolute skinful the night before.
Yeah.
He's locked in a room no bigger really than the Land Rover that was in there. And there was no physical threat. You didn't think at one point that this thing was going to overpower him. There was no danger or anticipation of any kind of life-threatening peril for this guy. You knew what was going to happen. I just thought that was to the real detriment of the film. You weren't afraid, or you weren't even in awe of the zombies in this at all. I didn't think that they really offered anything. And like you say, at one point it almost became like a slapstick comedy.
Yeah.
And he got dragged out from under the car.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen a shot like in Wreck where she gets dragged off camera at the end, and that's an absolutely hideous shot. But on here, it was like something off the Three Stooges or something.
Well, isn't it ironic that we're sort of sitting here talking about whether dead people should shuffle or run fast.
Yeah.
Actually, they shouldn't do any of the above. They should just be dead, really, shouldn't they?
Yeah, you're right. Thanks for making me look like a prick then.
No worries, Dan.
People within genre should be more concerned with, is it a fucking good film? That's the question.
Yeah.
I could care less how quickly or how slowly they're going. Is it a good film? So,
Yeah.
sorry, zombie lovers that enjoy that debate, but let's do something else, like make good films, write good books.
Yeah. Fair comment.
We could continue to say what we didn't like about it, but people get it by now. We didn't have a good time with the film. I wish there was a little bit more that we could say, but we can't. It'll be really interesting to see how the interview with David Moody goes, because he had a good time with it. So I've got a few questions for him.
Yeah.
Namely, what on earth did you see in the movie, mate?
That's fair enough. I mean, David's he's been involved in the zombie genre for a very long time, so I'd be interested to see what kind of highlights he picks out, and if he thinks that it's okay to just sit through a zombie film that a lot of people would found a bit tedious and generic, really. So I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say about it, without a doubt.
Let's sign off with some final thoughts. John?
Blank.
Well, if we're going to finish up the podcast like we did last time, and if we have to talk about whether we recommend this film or not, I mean, if the alternative is self-harm, then I would recommend this film. But other than that, I don't think that it's a possibility, I'm afraid. Sorry about that.
No, I can't recommend it.
Not at all.
There's nothing else to say on the matter, right? I cannot condone you going out and watching this film. Don't even watch it if it's free.
Well, watch it, but don't say we didn't warn you, I guess. And if you really love it, then I think you really need to book an appointment with your psychoanalyst.
Yeah, I mean, there were other websites and blogs that had a good time with it. Well, you didn't.
No.
That's it. Sorry.
Better luck next time, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, well, that wraps up the This Is Horror podcast. Next time we will be with Joseph DeLacy, and we will be reviewing Splinters.
Cool.
And before we go, I'd just like to thank some of the early listeners for some positive feedback. Namely, I was very pleased to get some great feedback from Livia Snedden of Booked Podcast, a great podcast that I listen to every week, and he had a good time listening to us, so we hope you enjoyed this one as well, Livius. Also, thank you to Sam Bonner, the author of Playground, who also said that he had a great time listening to the podcast. And thank you as well to Paul Feeney, a long-time supporter of the This Is Horror brand. Thank you. So that's it for this week, and all that remains is our interview with David Moody.
And now for our horror interview.
Welcome to our interview with David Moody, the author of the Autumn and Hater series. I'm going to be talking to David about Before Dawn and zombies in general. So our listeners have just heard the Before Dawn podcast, and none of us really got on with that film too well, but I understand that you did have a good time with it, and I just wanted your thoughts on it.
That's a real shame to hear, because I absolutely loved the film. From the first second to the end, I was absolutely blown away by it. But I wondered, thinking about that, whether it's something to do with what I write, because it was a very suburban zombie apocalypse. It was a very ordinary zombie apocalypse. And I was fortunate enough to meet Dominic Brunt after watching Before Dawn, and the first thing I said to him was, I wish you'd got hold of Autumn to film, because it really got the tone that I was going for in the books, which wasn't anywhere near caught in the film adaptation that was made of Autumn. I thought it was an excellent film. I thought it was nicely claustrophobic. I think that you could tell that the team behind it had got a huge respect for the genre, a huge knowledge of the genre, and it didn't play to all the cliches that I expected. It managed to avoid a lot of them.
So I think what our main criticisms were, which perhaps as a defender of Dominic Brunt, you could address. So firstly, we actually thought in terms of the filming, it was just filmed quite badly. There were shaky camera parts where it seemed unnecessary and it almost seemed not deliberate. Mm-hmm. There were also shots where they cut off the main characters' heads. There was one where they focused on a wine bottle and it just didn't seem to work with the scene.
Right.
To be honest, we've got quite an exhaustive list of what we didn't like in it.
You have, yeah. I've got to say, when I was watching the film, I wasn't aware of anything like that. Normally, something like that will jump out at me, but perhaps I was just so absorbed in what I was watching that all that kind of stuff passed me by. But I thought technically, although you could tell that it was made on a limited budget, and I think things like the fight scenes and all the blood were filmed in Dominic and his wife's kitchen, and bizarre things like that. But I think it worked really well. I thought the sound in the film was excellent. I thought the music was good. And you're going to say you hate the music now. I could just feel all this coming off you. But I thought the sound design was excellent. I love the way that the zombies, I love the noise that they made and the way that they moved, the way that they twitched. I just thought technically, considering the limited resources that they had, I think they did a good job.
I mean, so what we did, was it was obvious that Dominic has a passion for zombies and for horror, and so we did feel quite harsh slating the film when we know that this is a guy who has respect for the genre. It's something that he loves, and clearly he had the best intentions going in and filming it. In terms of the audio, there were some parts of the soundtrack that we thought were reasonable, but one bizarre thing was we actually felt they got the levels wrong, particularly near the start. The music was just too loud for the speech.
Right. I feel a bit like a lamb to the slaughter here. You've not having the benefit of having heard your review, But where did you see it? Did you watch it on DVD?
So we watched it on DVD.
Maybe that's part of the difference, because I saw it on at the cinema on a big screen. And as I said, I didn't pick up on the issues that you're raising here. But probably when I go back to watch it again on DVD, I'll hate it now because of all these points all these faults that you've pointed out.
So you've met and spoken with Dom about the film, and I wondered if you could provide us with an insight from your conversations with him on the film.
Well, we didn't get to talk a huge amount about the film. I've been trying to catch up with him by email since, but he's a very busy guy at the moment. I was just like a little kid when we met, because it was at the day of the Undead Festival in Leicester. So it's just a day of zombie films.
Yeah.
And I'd been told by a couple of friends that I would like Before Dawn, that they thought was the kind of film that I'd really go for. Tried to get to see it at the Grimm Festival in Manchester, but was late, and so I missed it. I was absolutely gutted, so I just couldn't wait to see it. So when he came over to where I was in Leicester, I was just like a little kid, really excited, couldn't wait to see it, couldn't wait to meet him and say I was going to go in and watch it. But he completely blew me away by looking at Autumn and saying, "Shit, you wrote Autumn." So there was kind of a mutual thing that I just wasn't expecting at all. And it's typical in these things, it's a crowded room, you're surrounded by loads and loads of people, so I didn't get a huge amount of time to talk to him afterwards, just able to say that it was the kind of thing that I had always envisaged for Autumn. And again, I think that is probably why I enjoyed the film so much, because I'm looking at it from the point of view of somebody who's written quite a similar story and had it bastardised in film form. And he achieved what I hoped that the makers of the Autumn film would have achieved. So I guess it was a bit congratulatory from that point of view.
And one thing which we touched on in the podcast before, and you have mentioned now, is it was made on a low budget. And I mean, what sort of leeway and concessions should we be giving for that anyway? I mean, is it fair to come up with criticisms about the filmmaking when obviously he's been doing this on a shoestring budget anyway, and how far do we take these concessions?
Well, I think it's fair to be critical if you've watched a film and you've come up with that criticism, if that makes any sense. I think irrespective of the budget, there are $1 million films, $100 million films which just look incredibly shoddy, and so there's no excuse for them. I think that you should always be mindful of the passion that people put into films, because something like this film, it's not that they're not going to make huge amounts of money from it. They're not going to sell loads of Happy Meals. They're not going to sell loads of books and toys and everything. They just make it for the sheer love of doing it, because they've got a passion for doing it. And I think that people who do that should be applauded. I'm a massive fan of 1950s B movies, and a lot of them are absolutely dire. They're terrible, terribly acted. The stories are horrendous. They're very formulaic, but I love them. And part of the reason I love them is because the people that made them really gave a damn. They really cared about what they were putting on the screen, as opposed to a lot of the studios these days who are just interested in product and regurgitating the same old thing because they know it's going to make a profit. And then you're going to get me going on to remakes and sequels and reboots and everything, and we really don't want to go there.
So going back to when you first discovered zombies and apocalyptic films and fiction, what were the origins of this for you?
Well, I think there are a couple of key points for me. One of them was, I grew up in the 1980s when Video Nasty's grief was at its height, so it was actually impossible to get any decent horror. So the only horror films that we could really see were like Hammer and Universal films. Used to be shown in double bills on a Saturday night on BBC Two. So it was a question of waiting till your parents had gone to bed, sneaking back downstairs because there were no videos. I'm so old, This really does make me feel old whenever I talk about this. But I had a lifeline, fortunately. I had a friend whose dad ran a comic shop in Birmingham, and this friend's dad would disappear off to America several times a year and just come back with shed loads of stuff that we couldn't get over here. And this one time he came back with a Laserdisc player. Remember Laserdiscs?
Yeah,
like 12-inch CDs. And he bought a load of films as well. And we were just around my friend's house one afternoon, flicking through the box of films that he'd bought, and one of them was Night of the Living Dead, the original 68 black and white one. So we shoved it on, obviously knowing of its reputation but not knowing a huge amount about it. And we watched it, and there was an enormous thunderstorm outside, and it went pitch black, and we were only like early teens, and it just absolutely blew me away. And from that point on, I always wanted to do something with zombies. So that was really where that came from. But another aspect of growing up in the 80s was that I was a Cold War kid. So there always seemed to be the threat that in 4 minutes' time we're going to get the shit blown out of us. We're going to, or that the 4-minute warning is going to go off, and that's it. And I guess part of the that always, I had a science fiction fascination as well, and the two things kind of merged together. And in early 80s, 84, 85, watching films like Threads and The Day After, and then The War Game, an old BBC documentary that was banned for years, just watching those kind of films, the sheer horror, the sheer relentless horror of it, and the fact that it felt so real, and it felt like, if I stop watching this film now, in half an hour's time that could be us. It was so close, and it was just a real fascination and an absolute horror, and that's kind of what dragged me into the post-apocalyptic genre. I think it's really interesting because in a post-apocalyptic scenario, or an apocalyptic scenario, people are people. All the bullshit and everything is stripped away. All the pretense that we have in our daily lives just goes, and you just see people for what they really are. And I think that's really interesting to watch and to play with.
So you mentioned Night of the Living Dead as your first experience with zombies.
Yeah.
How do you think it stands up today?
I actually think it stands up pretty well. I think that's a lot of that is because it really set the blueprint for the traditional zombie story. And Romero at the time, although I don't think he consciously did it, he was setting out the blueprint for what a zombie should be. And people talk about the classic zombie, which is the Romero zombie, so it's not very fast, although they do run in Night of the Living Dead, because you go back and look at it now and you see all these paradoxes. So yeah, they're not particularly fast, they're not particularly strong, but they're relentless, and they're cold, and they're unemotional. And the scenes with Johnny, Barbara's brother, who dies in the first couple of minutes but then comes back and attacks the house with the rest of them later, it's that kind of thing that freaks me out about zombies still, the fact that they're us and we're them, and there's such a fine line between us. So yeah, I think it does still hold up today. Obviously, technically, it's another film that was made on a shoestring. It's another film that was made I think in like Snatched Weekends and alongside Romero shooting adverts, I think, is what he was doing at the time. But it holds up pretty well, and again, the passion for the story comes through.
You mentioned the slow zombies in Night of the Living Dead and how they've now evolved into fast zombies, or rather than evolved, there are now almost two distinctions. You've got the slow-moving and the fast-moving zombie film. First of all, do you have a preference? And secondly, should people really be so concerned with, which is better out of the fast or the slow-moving zombie? Again, earlier we came to the conclusion that really you should be looking at, is this a good film or is this a good book?
I think you're exactly right. And to answer your questions in reverse, no, I don't think we should be concerned, because a writer, a director can trump up as many ideas and explanations as they want as to how a zombie can move or can't move. It could be something to do with the virus or the radiation or whatever that allows them to move with such speed, even though biologically it's impossible. But biologically it's impossible for a dead person to move anyway, so who cares? Personally, I'm in favour of slow-moving zombies still, because I think there's something incredibly frightening about an enemy that's taking its time to kill you. It's almost like they're playing with you. It's like being tied to a train track and it's a long straight train track, and the train you can see about 10 miles away and it's coming really slowly, and at some point it's going to crush you and there's nothing you can do about it. And that's the same with zombies. I think that they're going to get you, and they're just taking their time and they're cool and they're slow, and I think that the kind of arrogance of the zombie really appeals.
And in Before Dawn, to go back to Dominic's film, he opted for the fast-moving zombie. Do you think it could have worked with slower zombies? And how did you feel that the fast zombies worked in that film?
I actually liked them. I think I already mentioned that the movements and the noises, the twitching, it was kind of nervous spasm, which I really liked. It gave the impression that they didn't have as much control as they thought they did. I think it worked well. I think we've kind of been... everybody's used to the fast-moving kind of rage zombies from 28 Days Later, and they're no longer the novelty that they were when that film first came out. So I think they sit in more zombie films quite well, and it for me, it wasn't an issue at all. Whether it would have worked with slow-moving zombies, perhaps it would, but again, it's a film made with limited budget, limited resources. In autumn, they're slow-moving zombies, and it's an isolated farmhouse, as in Before Dawn. And with that, it's the sheer numbers that get the survivors in the end, just a constant arrival, because there's no other distraction. They're the only people left alive, the ones in the farmhouse, and so the zombies from miles around just gravitate towards this place. And so I think that crowds of hundreds of thousands of slow-moving corpses are equally terrifying, but very difficult to represent on film.
Zombies for the last 5 to 10 years have been they've been very popular. Do you think there's almost been so many zombie films and zombie books that the zombies are losing their fear factor?
I think so, definitely. For as long as I've been writing about zombies, which is 10, 12 years now, people have been saying that the bubble's going to burst, that people will get fed up of zombies. And over the last few months, I can feel that definitely happening. Now when I have conversations with people and they find out that I'm a writer, they say, "What do you write?" I say, "Horror," and they're still quite interested. What kind of horror? "Oh, I've written a few zombie books." "Oh, right, okay." And it's a kind of awkward silence. Which is a real shame, because I still believe that zombies are just the king of horror monsters. They're so adaptable. They just absolutely terrify me, which is brilliant. But I think we are getting a bit sick of them. There are a few little gems that are still around. Obviously, The Walking Dead is still doing good business. But I think we're in danger now of them being cemented too much in the mainstream. I haven't seen Warm Bodies, so I can't comment on it. But, teenage zombie comedy things. I don't really want to go there. It kind of sums it up for me, looking at the difference between Zombieland and Shaun of the Dead. Shaun of the Dead is one of my favourite zombie films of all time, because it's just a straightforward, well-made zombie film that just happens to star idiots, whereas Zombieland is just slapstick. Let's have a joke, let's see how many gruesome ways we can get rid of bodies, etc. And I think that difference to me is important. There are huge numbers, as you say, of zombie books and zombie films, and I think that one of the reasons for that is that they're so easy to do, but I think they're also easy to do wrong. I'm not saying that I do it right, but I think that if the focus is on the zombie and the grotesqueness of the zombie, then the author, the director, is missing the point a little bit.
You talk about the differing approach to comedy in Shaun of the Dead and Zombieland. Is it fair to say that this is symptomatic almost of the American and the British approach to comedy?
Oh, definitely, yeah, I think that's right. I think it's symptomatic to the British difference between the British and American approaches to zombies, full stop. Going back to Autumn, right from the beginning when that book first came out, I always got a lot of bad reviews from Americans because, well, pretty much anybody who wasn't British or wasn't based in the UK, because the books don't subscribe to all the usual cliches. You know, there are no guns, there are no heroes, there are just a few miserable people trying their best to cope with the end of the world, which for me is the characters are the focus of any good story. You know, not the thousands of corpses outside the window. It's the reactions of the people inside the building trying to deal with that.
So when it initially took off, the Autumn series, was it mainly a British audience that were coming onto your site and reading Autumn, or was it quite a mixture of US, UK?
It was quite a mixture. Yeah, it was primarily the UK or the US, but you're fairly evenly split at the time. A lot of UK readers really went for it because it was the first time they'd read anything like this that was set in the UK rather than being set abroad. Yeah, I think the audiences are changing a little bit now with films and books like The Walking Dead. The American audience, I think, is getting more used to our way of doing. No, that sounds really pretentious. Not our way of doing it, but you know what I'm saying. That they are happy now with a character-centric zombie story more than audiences were when Autumn first appeared in 2001, 2002, or whatever. When, as I said, I regularly get berated by people who couldn't understand why these people in the farmhouse weren't going out there with axes and guns and shooting hell out of everything they could see.
So where do we go from here with the zombie genre? Do you think we should look at reinventing the zombie, going back to basics? Or is it a good idea to actually shy away from them and give them a bit of breathing space?
Well, from my point of view, that's exactly what I'm doing. The thought of writing another zombie story at the moment just fills me with absolute dread, and I know of other authors who feel the same. And yet that fascination with them still remains, and I still want to do something more with them eventually, but I think that, yeah, the best thing is to leave well alone for a little while. One of the beauties of zombies is that they're so adaptable, and you can drop them into any situation and you can give them any twist you like. You know, wherever there are people, there are zombies, so the possibilities are infinite. But I do think at the moment that we're getting to the stage where we're at overkill. I think there'll be a real important moment later in the year when World War Z comes out, because I think a lot of what happens with the zombie genre from here on in for the next couple of years is dependent on the success of that. And personally speaking, I don't imagine there's going to be a lot of success. Well, possibly financial success, but in terms of critical reception, I've not heard too many positive comments from what I've seen so far, and I'm not a fan of the CGI zombies that I've seen in the trailer. So I think, that could be quite pivotal for the zombie subgenre during this coming year.
Do you think the trend to use CGI not only for zombies but in the horror genre and for monsters as a whole, is this a mistake?
I think CGI can really brilliantly add to a scene, but it can also detract absolutely everything from a scene at the same time. I think that physical effects are great because they're immediate and they're there, and you can get a real reaction, you know, from the actors and from the effect itself. I think CGI, I'd say, can be used well. One of my favourite films is Children of Men, and I absolutely love the final scenes in Bexhill refugee camp when it comes across as a constant long tracking shot through the ruins and through the fighting. But you know it's been added to with CGI, and there are CGI blood splashes up the camera lens and all kinds of things, and that works really well for me. But I think if there's an over-reliance on CGI, if everything is CGI, then at the moment I don't think the technology is there to make that realistic enough for it to work. I'm trying to think of a film that I was watching recently and it's completely gone. I don't know, but all of the blood was done with CGI, and I'm afraid you can't do liquids yet, or you couldn't at the time that the film was made. I really can't think what it was I was watching, But for me, the CGI blood in that just absolutely ruined the moment. So I think it can be used well to supplement physical effects. I'm talking like I'm an expert here and I really don't have a clue, but I just know what works for me when I'm watching.
And in terms of films, are there plans for Autumn to be remade, or for the Hater series to be made into film?
Well, I'm kind of on the fence at the moment about this. There are no definite plans for Autumn, and again, I think that this might be a victim of the overuse of zombies at the moment. I can't imagine there will be, but I would love one day to have a serious, decent budget mini-series made of the books, as many books as they could. As far as Hater goes, the option is still there with Del Toro and Mark Johnson, but obviously Del Toro's off with Pacific Rim, and I think he's got his next few films planned after that, and he takes on so many projects, and so few of them actually get made. I don't know, I think that it'll happen if the market wants it. You know what I'm saying? I think that they're about to make Cell, aren't they? They're about to start production on Stephen King's Cell, which has been in gestation for a long time. And I can imagine that if a film like that is successful, then they're going to want something that's similar. And when Hater came out originally, it was around the same time as Cell, and the books got bracketed together a lot of the time. So, perhaps something will happen. I'm not holding my breath at the moment. J.A. Bayona was tapped to direct originally, and he's gone on to have great success this year with The Impossible, and I think he's signed up for his next film, which is a science fiction film, so I can't see him coming back to the fold anytime soon. But there's another part of me that is I feel really disenchanted about film at the moment, because there are so many nightmare stories about how badly writers in particular are treated in the film industry, and my experience of it is that pretty much everything I hear is true. It's not great. It's a great move in terms of publicity, but financially it's not fantastic to have your book adapted for film. So there's a part of me now that's thinking, sod off, just leave it alone. I don't want anybody getting involved in my films. What I'd love to do eventually is make the films myself, and I think we're getting close to the stage where you can get your hands on enough technology to make a decent film. And of course you're going to need actors, and you're going to need people who can do the effects for you and everything, but those people are more accessible. And with the internet, I think we're able to distribute and generate an income from our own digital products. It's what I was doing like 10 years ago with ebooks. Now, before we had Kindle, before we had iBooks, I was selling PDFs and getting a couple of dollars for each one and just emailing them out. And I don't see why we couldn't do something similar with film. And I'd rather do something completely independent of any studio or any executive who, as I said earlier, just wants to sell Happy Meals or toys or whatever. I think to keep true to your story, you need to retain some level of control. So really, that's where I'd love to go. Self-published film, if that makes any sense.
So in terms of making a film such as the Autumn series, or indeed any zombie film on a small budget, one of the trends for the small budget films is to do a kind of found footage film, because that's incredibly cheap to put together. And although both found footage and zombie films seem to be incredibly oversaturated, I can't think of many which have combined the two. Do you think that's a viable option? Is it a realistic option? Is it something that seems a bit silly to ask, is it realistic in a zombie apocalypse, which by its nature...
I do know what you mean. I think it's viable if the story's there, if you write it properly and you can come up with a good enough concept. The biggest issue in found footage for me is holding the camera. And when Cloverfield came out, however many years ago that came out, I really enjoyed it. But it got to the stage when there's the one scene near the end where one apartment block has sort of collapsed into the other one, and they're going to rescue the girl, and they're climbing over the roofs of one, and I'm thinking, why the hell have you still got that camera? Why the hell would you be filming this? And it just totally ruined the film for me to an extent. But if you can find a viable reason why something would be filmed, I know this isn't true found footage, but a great example is Aliens, when the Marines first go into the base after they've landed on the planet, and you've got the point of view cameras of all the different Marines, and they slowly go off, and that is found footage done right for me. But it depends, of course, on the setup. As I said, you wouldn't have, in a zombie apocalypse, most people walking around with cameras strapped to their head.
And there are new inventive and experimental ways to do found footage. I think the film VHS is a great case study of that, because you've got people using webcams and Skype. There's a guy who's actually got glasses which have a camera built into them. And do you think that's a way forward?
No, definitely. I think that found footage should become more plausible. We walk around with cameras all the time. 10 years ago we didn't. So it is more viable, but still the point remains, if something horrendous is happening in front of you or to you, are you going to whip out your camera, or are you just going to run like hell? One thing that I'd love to see is more point of view films rather than found footage, something shown from the point of view of one of the characters. I think the remake of Maniac, a whole film being filmed from one person's perspective, and again that's slightly different from found footage. I think that could work, but if it's done right technically.
So I caught the remake of Maniac at FrightFest, and it was one of the better films there in my top 5. So
cool. No, I'm looking forward to seeing it just for that reason.
I think, so now we've completely deviated onto Maniac.
That's okay.
I think remaking such a classic horror film as Maniac could have gone incredibly wrong, but yeah, they pulled it off fantastically, and particularly the casting decision as well.
Elijah Wood.
Yeah. I mean, Elijah Wood, who was best known for Lord of the Rings, he added some menace to to his repertoire, and
that's good. I have a real issue with remakes, so it's good to hear when they go right. I'm trying to work out the formula. I'm convinced that there's a formula, and I'm going to find it at some point. So how you can work out whether a remake is going to be diabolical or good. At the moment you can just say you've got 95% chance it's going to be diabolical, because pretty much every remake I've seen recently has been.
I would say when remaking or adapting either a film or a book to screen, you want to be sincere to the original source material, but you also want to do something original with it, so that's quite a tricky combination.
It is. But for me, the golden rule, I think, has got to be, if we talk about remaking films here, why remake a film that's a critical success? Because there are extenuating circumstances. If a film was made 100 years ago and you can do more with the technology now, then maybe there's a viable reason for doing it. But generally, if a film has been really well received and it's a critical success, why are we remaking it? I know Hollywood comes up with all kinds of reasons why, like the Psycho remake, for an example, just to retain the rights. And somebody was saying the other day that all the Spider-Man reboots and the proposed Batman reboots are again just to keep a hold on the rights, and it's a pretty sad state of affairs when that's the kind of thing that we use. That's the kind of measure that they use as to whether a film's going to be made or not. Originality is just being pushed out of the system from all angles, I think, and it's incredibly sad. I think, just completely going off topic here, one of the saddest things that happened in film last year was Taken 2. Because, not that I saw it, but it was universally panned. But it got backsides on seats, so they immediately start work on Taken 3, and it just seems that we're stuck in this downward spiral of mediocrity. And all the stuff that could get made, the original stuff, is too much of a financial risk, so it gets pushed to one side. And that's not just me being bitter, because Hater was almost in front of the cameras and then it got pulled.
I mean, I think Taken, that was pretty well received, but for me, I felt that it was very gratuitous and didn't actually treat the subject matter with the respect that it deserved.
No, it didn't, no.
So it was almost treating the kind of imprisonment and prostitution and drug abuse of young girls as if it was a film device. And in contrast to that, you have a film called The Seasoning House, which took a similar subject matter, but it was so bleak and it was so gritty and it was so real. I think what Hollywood tends to do, and what's happened in the case of Taken, is you've taken a very serious subject and you've put a gloss over it. And so you've created this barrier between reality and what's on the screen. And I appreciate that some people, when they go to the cinema, they are going for escapism and a release. But I think if you're going to take such sensitive and such atrocious subject matter, you've got to be careful what you do with it. And it is really insensitive for those people that are suffering to almost make a spectacle of it.
Oh, you are right. And if I came across as a supporter of Taken, then it was purely unintentional.
No.
My point was the film made money, so it was followed up by an inferior sequel, which also made money. So that's going to be followed up by a probably equally inferior sequel, and so on and so on, and the cycle continues. And as a result, all the stuff that's out there which could be greenlit, is not going to be, because it's not a financial cert. Again, this takes me back to wanting to produce films independently, because I genuinely think it's the only way that you can do it and retain any degree of control.
And there were a lot of fans of Taken, and you're allowed to enjoy it. It doesn't mean you condone or support.
Absolutely. Yeah, I write horror, so I'm always happy to be sitting on the sidelines. I know people that write more mainstream books and sell absolute shed loads of copies, and I know that writing in horror, we're never going to do that, so we're always going to be out on the fringes. But that's not a bad thing, because I think it's far more important to write about what you're interested in, what fires you up, and what you love.
And how important is it to remain sensitive to subject matters such as those in Taken? Anything which could be seen as sensitive. Should we be mindful of that? Should we be...
I think we should. I don't think we should necessarily avoid them. I think we've talked about this before. The next book I'm going to write, one of the central things is the murder of children, which is a horrific thing to write about. And I'm very conscious that, I may well come across as trivialising it, because it's this is a work of fiction, and have I got any right to be writing that kind of thing? And it gets even worse, because there's going to be a paedophile in the book who is killing kids, but he, one of the central questions for the main character is going to be, he's telling me things, is he telling the truth? And he may well end up siding with a paedophile, which is just wrong on every single level. Yeah, we definitely shouldn't trivialise these things or take anything lightly, but at the same time, I don't see that we should steer away or avoid them like the plague.
I mean, a lot of my favourite books and films do deal with hard-hitting subject matter.
Yeah.
So I'm certainly not saying don't write about it. In fact, I think taboos should be confronted more. But what I am saying is, if you do, you've got to do it with almost an air of authenticity. Now, obviously, you can't be a child murderer as such, but
you've got to have some sensitivity there, not trivialise the subject.
I mean, one of my favourite books is called The End of Alice by A.M. Holmes. That is effectively a correspondence between two paedophiles.
Right.
And one of them is grooming the other. It's just really great storytelling, although understandably you feel very uncomfortable throughout. And I tweeted A.M. Holmes about it, and she said it's the sort of book where you read 20 or so pages, then you throw it across the room, and you go and pick it up again and read a little bit more.
We were originally talking about zombies, and it feels like we've strayed a little bit here.
A little bit.
But there are overlapping themes, and I think one of the fascinations for me with zombie genre is the closeness of the zombies to us. The fact that, I mentioned autumn, and I used to get a lot of grief off people because they're just saying, why don't you go out there with a gun and mow more down? And I think, fair enough, you might have the balls to go out there and club a creature around the head with a baseball bat. But what if you go out there and the creature that you've got to club around the head with a baseball bat used to be your daughter, or used to be your wife, or your dad, or whatever? I think that's a really interesting theme that runs through a lot of zombie fiction, the fact that there is this very fine line between us and them, and us and them really is what all good zombie stories boil down to, I think. That's why the Hater series was always... people always talk about it as if it's a zombie book, and it's not. The Hater series aren't zombie stories at all. They're just stories of people against a different type of people, and that's why the last book was called Them or Us, because that's what it boils down to, and that's what it boils down to, I think, in pretty much every zombie story. Is it going to be them, or is it going to be us? Who's got the will to survive? And again, that's why zombies are terrifying, because they've got this cold detachment. They're completely unemotional, and they'll do whatever they can, slowly and surely, to wipe out the living. And so, I just find that a really interesting aspect of the genre.
And there seems to be a rising trend for home invasion and gang and chav culture films, and I wonder is this going to replace zombies, or at least become more predominant, and is this actually a more human version of the zombie? We've got humans being very primitive, attack, and could the move from zombie to gang and chav culture actually be quite like the slasher film, where you then take the mask off and actually it's a film about a serial killer?
Yeah, I think there's something in that. I was really taken by surprise the other day. I was talking to one of my kids. She was talking about somebody who'd really wound her up, and she was saying, he's just a chav. Yeah. And the way that she was saying he's just a chav, it was almost, it came across as being almost racist, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's like that's a separate division of society, and we will not speak kindly of them, and it's really interesting. I think that there are lots of shifts happening in society at the moment. I think it's a really odd time, because there are so many paradoxes. I think we hear a lot about the 1% as opposed to the 99%. You know, this small minority of people that hold all the power and have got all the money, and you know, we've got a government which is just public school boys and people who are bred for politics, who have no experience of anything other than politics. And it's really frightening, because you know, they're the people that are making decisions, and at the other end of the spectrum, I guess, there are people who genuinely don't give a damn, who are happy just to take and destroy. And there always will be, I guess. There always has been and there always will be. And there's a huge swathe of people, I think, stuck in the middle. It's something that I'm writing about in the book, which I'm hoping to finish tomorrow. I seem to say that every night. I'm hoping to finish it tomorrow. I think it's really interesting. I think there are lots of shifts. I think the old class structure, which we had before, of like lower middle, working middle and upper class, is long gone now, and we're developing new, don't know what the word is. I don't want to use the word class, but new divisions, I guess. We are becoming a very divided society, I think, though not in the way that we always were.
And do you think the London riots of a couple of years ago played a part in this division and in this uprising, as it were?
I don't necessarily think that they've played a part in it, but I think they were symptomatic of it. They were a result of it. I think we're so driven by advertising and consumption these days, and there are people that can't afford the things that they're told they need, and that obviously causes resentment. So I think that the riots a couple of years ago were a result of frustrations boiling over.
And in terms of class divisions and the chav, as it were, I think there's almost, in calling somebody a chav, particularly with the spite and the hate that can follow, it is like a dehumanisation of that person. So you could turn it around into the metaphor that they're becoming zombies, in the sense that it's being completely distinct. And really, if you're being singled out like that, even if it's singled out as a collective, as a group, is it any wonder that they might want to go around and smash things up? No,
I think you're absolutely right. Just mentioning my daughter back then, the way that she said it's just a chav, it did come across as being it's just a zombie. It's not worth worrying about. It's one of the things that fascinates me. I'm a big people watcher, which always makes me sound like a pervert. You know what I mean? I like looking at human behaviour and analysing it. And I think that one of the saddest things is that as people we're pre-programmed to survive and look out for ourselves, and inevitably not everybody is going to survive. Somebody's going to lose out somewhere along the line, but nobody wants to lose out, so there's always going to be this kind of friction, this kind of fighting. Now I feel like I've put a kind of primary school spin on things. But you know what I'm saying. We're pre-programmed to survive, and we can't all survive.
And do you think that's one of the reasons for the apocalyptic genre having such a wide appeal? Because you can almost play out your fantasies in terms of what would happen if we were to reset, if we were to just wipe the majority of the people off the planet. And
I think it's a really interesting and quite a depressing thing to think about. I won't say too much other than please go and read the Hater series, because them or us, the last book answers what I think would happen to an extent. You know, when the fighting's done and you've won or you've lost, you know, what comes next? And the answer, unfortunately, is probably more fighting.
There you go. That about wraps it up. So go out and buy the Hater series and the Autumn series by David Moody.
Yes, please. I'm thoroughly depressed now. I need to go home.
Yeah, you need to buy his books.
Yeah.
So thank you for listening. Next week we'll be interviewing Joseph DeLacy. And don't forget to check the show notes where you can read our full review of Before Dawn. You can check out other interviews with David Moody, and there's an interview with Dominic Brunt. And on that note, all that remains is for me to say goodbye and good night.